Hello, welcome to another episode of Album Musings. So, we're back in the saddle again with these. I took a week's break where I just stuck out some shorts while I mulled over some ideas for future content for the channel and did various other things. And it's nice to get back to doing these videos. I do enjoy these. These aren't super popular. I suppose it depends, not surprisingly, on the album that I feature. But I do enjoy putting these out and just reflecting on the time frame in which the album went out. So we're looking at Sing the Sorrow. Was released on March the 11th, 2003. So just to put this into context when this video is being recorded and released. So I record these videos the day before they go out, these particular ones. So it's Tuesday the 7th of March in 2023. It'll go out on the 8th of March 2023. And the album that we're going to talk about today, which is Sing the Sorrow, was released on March 11th, 2003. So just coming up for 20 years old. There were 3 singles off of this album, which is something I'll be talking about in this episode. But let's dive in and have a look at some of the different stats and other things surrounding this album, where it places on the timeline of the band. We don't want that, that's the calendar. So you can see here's Sing the Sorrow 2003. My introduction to AFI was through Black Sails in the Sunset around about 1999 into 2000. Well, it would have been 2000s because I only became aware of it as a result of it making a Terrorizer end of year chart. And I went out and bought the CD at the time because this would have been pre-streaming. And yeah, loved this album. This is quite a bit more sort of hardcore than the album we're going to be talking about today. But that was my sort of inroad to the band. I was aware of their releases, but hadn't really listened to them. And they'd actually had 3 releases before that. And you were seeing a move in the band's music, in the sort of genre, from hardcore punk in the early days for these albums into this more, during this period, a sort of horror punk, slightly sort of goth sound, I suppose, for want of a better word. The Art of Drowning. So we got hardcore punk, horror punk, melodic hardcore. There's a number of EPs that they released around that time. And then we end up with Sing the Sorrow. So hardcore, post-hardcore, and emo. In terms of emo, I'm not sure whether this is considered to be more of like second wave than the original emo. Let's just check that. Because when people talk about emo, I tend to think about bands such as, where are we? Yeah, Rites of, I was trying to, it's on the tip of my tongue. Rites of Spring. And also you've got bands like, if you pre-emo, so the sort of hardcore punk bands, post-core hardcore bands that influenced emo, like Minor Threat, Black Flag, Husker Du, those sort of bands. And so it's been like a constant evolution, reinvention, Jawbreaker, Sunny Day Real Estate. I was actually trying to think, although I was aware of the bands I'd already mentioned, I don't think I was aware of emo being applied as a term until probably this period, like Jawbreaker and Sunny Day Real Estate, maybe. And I remember buying a lot of albums from this period, like 24 Hour, Revenge Therapy. But yeah, just interesting because what's I found interesting about AFI is this sort of evolution in their career through the album cycle. So if you move on to December Underground, you know, they're starting to shift more into alternative rock, post-hardcore. And then we got Crash Love, where we're getting into basically pop rock. Now, there was a recent album, the album Bodies. And so now they're being sort of classed, I suppose, as post-punk. And when you've got a band with, you know, a body of work like this that has evolved, by the time you get to their later albums, they're, you know, reabsorbing, I think, a lot of their earlier stuff. So back to the album which we're actually talking about, which is Sing the Sorrow. We have 3 singles, each with an accompanying video. So those were Girls Not Grey, The Leaving Song Part 2 and Silver and Gold. Now, they had better chart success in the US than they did in the UK, but I'm going to be looking at it from a UK lens because I was curious how well they did, because my exposure to the band was through the earlier material, which definitely wasn't featuring at all in the UK charts, and I only became aware of through reading Terrorizer magazine. So I'm curious as to where they place again alongside other bands that were sort of much in the alternative rock category that were prevalent at that time. And also I want to talk a little bit about, at the end, about how in some instances I rediscovered those bands or were introduced to them for the first time through film soundtracks as well, because there's an interesting lineup here. So it's a pretty long album, 55 minutes, because we're, you know, very much in the era of CD, and of course the version that I have is on CD. And here they were, you know, doing that fairly common thing at the time, where I was definitely saw an increase in hidden tracks. The other thing I saw in terms of hidden tracks, there's a few albums where the CD would like flick through and sort of count up. There'd be like these tiny tracks, and then it would get to this last track. Not the case here, but I thought I'd just bring that up because that's something many people watching this may be aware of. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. There was at least one CD where I had that was the case, but it's gone from my mind. So yeah, a lot of people involved in terms of additional musicians. Here's the lineup for the band. Maybe what I'll do here, let's actually have a quick look at the member timeline so we can just get an idea. So yeah, by the time of, well, let's say the 4th album, which is Black Sails in the Sunset, which would be here, we have a lineup now that is still together to this day. But yeah, quite a lot of additional backing vocals, quite a number of... It's interesting they've got here, I've not seen this before, where they list quite so many engineers and technicians and various other things as well. certifications and positions. So you can see here, album itself, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail in a moment, didn't do too well. Well, didn't even get in the top 40 in the UK, but got to number 5 on the US Billboard 200. And yeah, I don't know, like these obviously get, I imagine, massively out of date, but there's no certification listed here at all for the UK. And I'll come back in a moment actually how I got sort of re-exposed to the band, I suppose, in this period, through a couple of sources, if you like. Just looking at the release dates actually. So a little bit of staggering going on here. Came out actually in the UK before it was released in the US. So let's look at Album of the Year. Well, no surprise to see this based on their metric, their most popular album. This actually is my favourite album by them, Black Cells in the Sunset. But I do like this album. But for some reason, I just really, first time I heard this, I loved this album at the time, and still, I listen back now to this. So let's have a look. So basically, from the UK chart perspective, it was on the chart for 1 week. There's never been any re-entries since then, and it didn't get in the top 40, just got to number 52. This is what the chart looked like that week it was in. So you can see we've got Coldplay kicking around, Let Go by Avril Lavigne. These would be all the albums from that period, or that week. Sugar Babes was the best of Led Zepp, Eminem Show, Busted, Pink, Thriller, one of probably numerous re-entries. Thousands, Window by Massive Attack, One by One by the Foo Fighters, Melody AM by Rykesop, Dixie Chicks. We've got a Ozzy Osbourne sort of greatest or compilation, Moloko. Damnation in a Day was just got in new entry just above the top 40. Escapology by Robbie Williams was on its way out. Parachutes by Coldplay was kicking around. There we are, Sing the Sorrow. New entry just below Audio Slave, which was on its way out the charts. And there's some other things kicking around lower down here. We've got some Feeder and some Oasis. Now, the other thing, just to jump back one step to the band, I'm just curious. So 4 singles in the UK charts throughout their career. Album-wise, 5 albums. So they didn't start getting chart success in the UK until Sing the Sorrow. December Underground was their highest charting album. And then, since then, nothing's really done better than those two. So let's look at some of the singles now. So 3 singles, and you can see here, if we look at the UK rock chart, number 4, but the UK actual, like, whatever you call it, the regular chart. Girls Not Grey got to 22 and The Leaving Song 43. So Girls Not Grey was released on January the 12th, 2003. Next single, September the 8th, 2003, which is The Leaving Song Part 2. And then Silver and Gold, November the 11th, 2003. This is the one that didn't chart on the UK singles chart. So let's have a look at those positions. So, Girls Not Grey, there, and The Leaving Song. And we have the first single, so got to number 22, and as we go down the charts you can sort of see here what was on the charts at that time. Bring Me to Life by Evanescence was at number 1. And you can see that had a pretty long run on the charts at the time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this at the end. If we look at The Leaving Song, which was the second one, much further down the charts. There we go, number 43. As you saw, just 2 weeks in the charts, in the top 100, but didn't quite make the top 40. Now, this is the week of the 14th of September, and it was released on the 8th, so it did get in fairly quickly after, but just didn't get up there on the charts. At that time we've got White Flag by Dido, got Black Eyed Peas, Time Is Running Out by Muse, so I would have been listening to Muse at that time. Numb by Linkin Park, also listening to them. Wildest Dreams by Iron Maiden. The Sacrament by Him, yeah. White Stripes. Got Girls Aloud. So there's a number of bands here that were off the back of various sort of talent shows at the time. And in terms of the third single for the band, didn't chart, as I've said. So this, the one we just looked at, which would have been The Leaving Song, was the last single from that album to chart, the third single, Silver and Gold. Yeah, didn't feature at all. And then they didn't have another chart single until Miss Murder off the album after that, off of December Underground. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the film Daredevil, because it was really through this film that I got exposed to Evanescence. So yeah, this was on the soundtrack, and there was also like a video tie-in as well to the film. But it's a phenomenon that I noticed a lot at the time. There are a number of films out in the early 2000s where, as a result of the soundtrack, it resulted me getting into to various bands. So let's just look and see what was on this album. See what I got exposed to by just watching the film at the cinema. So Evanescence, definitely. Oh, there's My Immortals in there as well. Don't know if any of these other bands, really. I was already aware of Caesar. But one film from the previous year where it did affect my listening to a much bigger degree was the XXX soundtrack. And as a result of this, I checked out Rammstein finally, and I also finally checked out Hatebreed, and to some degree I think I revisited Queens of the Stone Age, although I was already aware of them around that time. And also I seem to remember going and buying a few Orbital or additional Orbital albums as well, although I was certainly aware of Orbital from an earlier period from the 90s. But it is interesting how this period in the early 2000s, where I was going to the cinema on a Sunday morning really regularly. There was a cinema reasonably, well, I'd say reasonably close, probably about half an hour drive to where I lived at the time. And on a Sunday morning, I think it was something like early Sunday morning was like something like £2 or £2 or £3 to go to see a movie. So I just see what was on, what was showing that week, and if it was something I fancied seeing, I go and watch it. I think I'd worked out that if I went every week at that amount, it was worth me buying like a monthly pass to go to the cinema. But I didn't always go 4 times in a month. I went definitely 3, maybe 4. And yeah, I was going to cinema a lot, and a lot of the films at that time were using, alternative rock, metal, like contemporary music soundtracks very heavily in there. And this one in particular, I mean, there's a cameo of Rammstein. They play at the club. I think they're very early on in the film. Actually, it's been, I probably haven't watched this film again since the 2000s. Yeah, in fact, I think I only ever saw it at the cinema. I don't think I ever bought it on DVD or have subsequently rewatched it. It has a bit of a sort of high-octane James Bond feel to it. So anyway, that's really what I want to say about this week's album, Sing the Sorrow by AFI. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next video.